Resuming our event, let's now invite our guests who will participate at the following panel: Artificial Intelligence, Digital Safety. We have Lais from Association of New Schools to be our mediator and to represent our Education Secretary of the State of São Paulo. I would like to invite Professor Costa, who is Director of the Center of Technology and Secretary of Education of the State of São Paulo. Corporate Citizenship from IBM, Juliana Nobre. CERT.br Manager, Christine Hoppers. And teacher from the Municipality Network of Schools, Débora Garofalo.
Eu passo a palavra para a Laís, nossa mediadora.
Good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here to talk about safe internet. We believe that schools are the proper setting to promote digital inclusion, digital safety, and for that purpose, we need to prepare our teachers so they can feel at ease to be able to address that topic to their students. And to address this relevant topic, I will hand over to Liliane. Liliane, she's here representing public policies. I am Liliane. I am here on behalf of the Secretary of Education. I apologize for him not making here today. I teach at the Public Education Network, and right now I am director of our center. Our secretary has been developing a number of actions to reach our students, and how will the public base support this ongoing endeavor? For quite many years, actually, we have five coordinators and one school for some presential studies and some e-learning. One of those was the Safe Internet. Safe Internet course became a mandatory module as part of our workshops. In addition, to learn more about that environment, teachers would go through that module, which would teach them things that maybe back in the year 2010, 11, today that sounds so obvious, but that was not the case in the past. Like how to prepare an email, to have a safe password, to log out. Sometimes we leave our Gmail or Yahoo open. You do not exit, you just close it, you leave it open, and anyone can access your account. Some simple hints as how can we navigate safely, how can we find safe websites, and to offer safe sites to our students to navigate. That was the first contact we had with teachers when technology becomes a reality. We have a program which is school access, as they are shaped like computer classes where students they have broader access to technologies, to the internet. So do teachers who would need a certain background for people to use internet safer. After that, and more recently, thanks to a partnership with FacerNet and Google, we had offered another course with 6,500 teachers, and 5,000 of them concluded it. That course is offered repeatedly until we realize that it has to be reshaped. Once we realize that the ongoing technology is no longer the same, it had become obsolete. different from the previous course that was more like Web 1.0. Today, technology advances at schools, and students and teachers, they are constant technology users. But sometimes we do not know how to make that bridge in the classroom. And now this course that was released last year and offered was so important as that became a new highlight about this critical, ethical, collaborative way of working in the web. It's very likely that this course will be once again offered this year. In Portuguese, as a syllabus, digital culture is emphasized at all grades, and that will still be perceived in the college level, where on high school level rather, and some issues such as collaboration ethics that becomes a classroom content integrated to your curriculum. So we have to, that is part, as part of our syllabus, language practice within and outside classrooms, and how do we use and submit a file, a document, how to produce content within the digital environment, how do we distribute that safely, what are the ethical principles to be kept within digital environment. Since the very beginning, we have to make clear that that we are traceable in the web and how does that happen. And in the Portuguese syllabus, that goes towards use of languages, where we'll talk about reading as in the past. I am a Portuguese teacher, for instance. We are going to talk about verbal, non-verbal, and the multi-semiosis available in the web, and some other readings which are possible, as well as writing productions able in the internet. Thinking about digital culture, how can we do that in a joint manner, critical way, ethical? How can we search for information at safe websites? How can I share information? How can I detect a fake news? All of that is a content to be dealt in the classrooms, exactly as we thought subject, verb, and complement. Now we will have more content towards digital culture that will be easily taken to a student who is a frequent user, but someone who not always has ethical or critical awareness. As part of this environment, what is acceptable, what is not, how do we approach bullying, which is a frequent matter at both private and public schools, how are people attacked in the web. Children and youngsters, they suffer lots of bullying in the virtual environment. How can we defend ourselves from that? A syllabus from São Paulo is the one which will emphasize a more critical use with awareness, and students that will need to reflect about the use of internet. That's not just an internet for fun, to play, but an internet which allows you to produce information, content, and at what extent are we responsible for what we produce and for that we make available at WhatsApp, Facebook, what is our availability in such an environment where we believe no one will ever find us. In the access room, we have some safe measures considering sites that they may or may not access, especially because we always work with kids and adolescents, teenagers. In addition to physical security, of not surfing the web, we also consider how to collaborate, allowing a syllabus which is aligned to digital culture, allowing students to be main players of their future.
Dentro da internet também.
Whatever happens within the internet will affect their personal lives. And bullying is a clear example of what happens in the network will affect their personal lives. And that is linked to a number of future traumas. A organized public policy has to consider a syllabus which includes technology as part of its principles. Thank you, Liliane.
Eu queria agora passar a palavra para a Juliana.
Next, I will hand to Juliana. I'm here representing cooperative citizenship at IBM and the importance of including technology as part of a syllabus in the public schools in the state of São Paulo. More we learn about technology, more we understand that it changes fast. And our role here is to follow that closely. And today, we keep hearing about fourth industrial revolution, which is impacting deeply our society. All new digital solutions or technologies, they represent a new transforming cycle in the society. And we have to follow that transformation. And the process throughout which we are going through is no longer different from what used to be internet in the past. Exposed to just a few, highly connected to academic settings, and today is finally accessible to all. But it has to be inserted and presented to be used widely by everyone. And this is exactly the pathway to be followed by artificial intelligence. But with a different speed, a velocity which we have to face, which we have to pursue in face of new technologies. And there is no other way to follow. We have to acknowledge, to be close, to understand, to be able to criticize, to learn about challenges, and also to embrace opportunities. This double understanding about new technologies and how to work challenges that has to be present in any new technology presented to us. And IBM, 1 year ago, reflected upon that. What are the possibilities of artificial intelligence on behalf of education? Talking to some private schools, coordinators, directors, and faculties, they got together to discuss about this new methodology, which is a different way of thinking outside the box, introducing opportunities, challenges, and among opportunities, we have to point out the possibility to have a more customized teaching. Once we understand that we can have a teaching process which will reach each one of the students interdisciplinary work somehow can expand and push up that this new way of seeing an interdisciplinary approach. And knowledge expansion. Once we say that computer systems they can enhance cognitive humans' abilities to solve problems, how can then we human beings understand it as an extension of our knowledge and somehow to benefit from it? There are some applied cases in the health sector or in the lawyer and or at law firms that can be supported by that machine. Machines, they just help humans' decision-making process. As part of challenges, the strongest one relies on privacy. And as society, we are slowly advancing data protection. It represents a step ahead in Brazil as well as in Europe. When we talk about artificial intelligence, yes, we have to consider privacy to that app and to question if a photo app does that really need all my personal information. We have to have a more critical understanding. With that we can increase our level of education. Conversely, as part of challenges, there is a concern about expansion of that gap, the split between those who have it versus those who haven't got it. All roles will be impacted by technology, by artificial intelligence. Well, not quite. No one, not everyone will become developers, but at least they will have to be able to talk, to understand what are the possibilities, and this relationship will be realmente pure and genuine. Like a taxi driver now benefits from different apps, and there is a new this is another example, and work together with schools where we can see in a society which is highly impacted by technology. That is essential. With that, we can avoid and not let any young behind, allowing them to keep on producing, following trends, and so on. And an additional point was raised by teachers who said that how can teachers have access to it? We cannot demand that to get to the end of the schools without allowing teachers to go through that process and to reflect about their impact and the use of technology, the use of cell phones in the schools, in the classroom. I mean, as a society, we are going through transformation. Therefore, we have to take a good look at the base, at the framework that are being constructed. And all sectors, they have to make their take and to find their position as technology afterwards will reflect what's taken place at the ends, considering principles, goals of this type of technology, and reinforcing the need of an ethical, transparent agenda with principles that are real rights and not just technology. That is very much important. Thank you. Thank you.
Agora, olha, alguém ganhou 2 minutos.
Well, someone got 2 minutes. Now we are going to call Christine to talk about the topic. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I do not deal directly with education. As a search manager, I see the problems that take place, incidents, complaints. And since the beginning of our work, we had huge demand in this regard. If you see the problem, why can't you create materials to help us prevent from risks? And this is very interesting. About 6, 7 years ago, we started to see a huge demand for materials to teachers. Teachers that would take part in events, they saw our event, our guides, and they wanted to use it in the classrooms. And then we started to have different fascicles. We say are the homeopathic doses, one talking about privacy, one talking about passwords, specifics. And together, we started to develop slides to be used in training. Again, because of the demand whenever there was a lecture. And we said, there are so many people using the material for class, why can't we make it easier for people to use it? And then, little by little, again, the demand started with people that were more senior, more adults, and then teachers from elementary schools. And why is that? Because children have their cell phones. Everything that we're talking about in the morning is part of the world of children. And we have material for children. We had just to focus on what? And the focus was on bullying and ethics, which I think is something that we have to have. But there is something else. There are other risks on the web. Cell phones that can start filming children, recording information about them. So we have to remember that children are the IT consultants of their parents' home. And the end of Alexandre's talk, he mentioned that he wanted to discuss a piece of data that was very interesting. And to me, since the first six kids came to surface, how parents think their children are safe on the web. And in the first study, it was completely the opposite. 70% of children said there were risks on the web, and 70% of parents thinking that everything was okay. And then you think, well, but do children know how to protect themselves? Because there are many things that we as adults have to teach them. And then I will approach a topic that is critical thinking, and you mentioned about that. And it is a bit worrisome to get to society today in which we outsourced critical thinking. You have to have an agency to say if it's fake news or not. That is, I have a population that does not have critical thinking. It cannot assess by themselves what it is. And then we go back to the challenge of education itself. I don't think that we have a recipe, but how do you get children and adults and educate them? Because some people say, well, there are lots of people that have a college degree and pass on fake news. It's true, but when we talk to people, they think social media is just like a newspaper. They think that they have a curatorship. And that's not it. So we need different levels of education for different targets. Some people say, oh, it was on Facebook, as if they were saying it was on the news. Facebook has a different dynamics. On the other hand, you have children that do not want to watch TV. They can't stand commercials. They want to go straight for the information. And we have to stop and think, how do we deal with all that? And one of the things that we see in terms of return is that younger people are still very naive. They understand technology, but when it comes down to it, the fact they can play a game or use the cell phone does not mean that they understand what is behind the web. And I think this is a gap. to try understand. Today we have artificial intelligence, so we are perfect. No, we are not. People would have to understand a bit of math, a bit of logics, to understand these are probable algorithms that can bring you an answer. And on the other side, some people sometimes are disgusted about algorithms, but algorithms translate to training. And we have seen algorithms that follow Twitter, and they become a bit violent, probably because they were following a discussion. So it's not the algorithm per se. There are people that are using. And so I think this is a point that little by little we have to address. Ideally, in the future, as I have seen in some countries, in their curriculum, they have to have 2 foreign languages, but one of the foreign languages is programming, which makes sense. When you are programming a computer, you are learning a language. It is called programming language. You are learning new syntax, you are learning semantics, and you have to dialogue with something that is a machine. The first time I saw it, I found it strange, but it's quite interesting. But that depends on the teaching of logics, mathematics. Again, we go back to the point that basic education, when it is good, is essential for us to have a whole generation that will interact to technology better. They will have to interact to technology, but they cannot be naive about that. And I think this is the most important thing. We're always going to have marketing, criminals trying to do something bad. And if we can all build a better internet, one of the things that we have been trying to invest on is the following. You have to see the risks that we come across. Most of attacks are just simple felonies that are difficult to detect because everything is very similar to legitimate messages, and they use the vulnerability of systems to be able to get to your cell phone. So they are more refined attacks, but it's basically a person that wants to extort or rob you. Or sometimes it's someone that has some work to deliver at school, and they got something on the web and they don't know how to decipher that. So these are challenges. Children have to be aware of things, because when an antivirus program says there is an attack, they have to know that this is bad. When there is an alert that a site has a problem, it's not that we want to cheat them, but there is a real problem. And we can feel from the interactions we have had with teachers is that teachers themselves do not understand the technology. So initiatives as this one of the Department of Education, we were part of the first wave of training. I mean, teachers have to be more comfortable with technology, for them to understand that the problem is not the technology per se, but rather the capacity we have to evolve with technology, because technology will change. So we have something that is very complex, different areas, and we have to have more dialogues. We have been trying to make this material available, but we have a challenge: how to get to private schools, public schools, in states where we are not present, to make things easier for us to spread the message. And then we are going to know where we want to get in 15, 20 years' time. It would be good if people were more savvy in terms of technology, even if they are not going to work with it, but to be more critical, to accept messages and products. Okay, thank you very much, Christine. Now, Débora. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you, especially because I am a teacher in the public system. I hope we can increasingly be in these areas where we can establish dialogues. I'm going to talk a bit about how digital citizenship and digital culture are inserted in schools. It's important to say that we don't have a technology that is fully contextualized for the school reality. The world is moving on to the 4.0 industry. But schools still use blackboards and chalks. We still use 1.0 concepts of education. But we are moving on to the 4.0 world with artificial intelligence, with programming, and etc. So, as a teacher of technology, one of my main concerns every start of a new year is digital citizenship, to have the concept discussed with my students. Why is that? Because I wasn't born in the digital era, but my students were. They are consumers of technology. And we want them not only to be consumers, but rather also producers. And to be producers of quality content, they have to understand it. So let's talk about digital citizenship and culture in the classroom. Technologies are going to offer a possibility of a more democratic access. It's the cyberspace. In the past, we didn't have access to knowledge, but our students do. I was talking to my students when I had to, I don't know, conduct any kind of research, I had to go to a library. We all did. Today, the information is at the tip of our fingers. So to think about that is important for them to understand that they have this access, especially to youngsters. Inside the classroom, we cannot say that you should not use the cell phone. I think the cell phone can be a teaching tool. It should not be left outside the classroom. But they have to understand how to use it so that they are able of using it with ethics and with reflection as established by the BNCC. And the BNCC was very important to us because it established technology as a teaching tool that has to be worked with, that has to be conceptualized. So the school should bring the concepts of digital citizenship, cyber activism, and assistive technology coming from the interaction with the internet and social media. There is no denial. This is the world. Today, our students can establish a dialogue, but we still have a gap, a bridge to be established because they don't have full awareness of what it is. So the school has to rethink of its role to establish this bridge and make it work. Juliana mentioned about one of the problems that I think everybody agrees, which is cyberbullying. It's very common to talk to students today and hear one of them saying that they either suffered or engaged into cyberbullying based on a real or non-real situation. But one of the most serious problems were that of girls setting dates with people they didn't know and really being scammed because they were naive, because they thought everything that is online is true, people are real. So, raising these points in the classroom, I think, is essential. And how does it work then? Digital citizenship in the classroom. First, you have to reflect the role of the school and our students. Many are not only consumers already, they are producers because they make available the content that they have, a YouTube video, and sometimes they don't have any criterion either, that they are posting something that will stay. A PowerPoint presentation, games. So it's important to approach critical thinking, talk about digital citizenship, because by then we are going to be preparing students to deal with the digital world, which is new to us, but it's not to them, although they don't reflect much on it. And then we have what we call active methodology or probably solving, having pathways to work in the classroom, talk about passwords, privacy, authors' rights, protection, and reliable sources. We have to prepare the kids for this new world. And how do we start? Well, I love guides and primers. I really love them. I work with CERT's guide. I like to work with it. I like to start the year working with it because it's a very playful material and children can understand it. There are some videos that are very nice for you to work with. As the video shows, children say, my God, I do that. I shouldn't do that. They put themselves in the right shoes. So I think teachers have, as teachers, to approach the topic. But we have to be open. We have to raise and foster dialogue in education, build actions of belonging. I say that a school is not an island. We need partnerships. That's why, as a public teacher, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk to you and tell you a bit about the work I am developing. This picture is the picture of the public prosecutor's office talking to children. And why is that? Because I had cases of girls being harassed and cyberbullying. And we have here Dr. Ana Paula. She is a state attorney of the Women's Center, and she started to talk to the kids. And she brought several examples that I, as a teacher, was not aware of, but she had the know-how to open the world to these kids. So again, these bridges are very important to establish an integration between the school and the community and to have concrete actions in the classroom. And what's the result of all the work developed? And it is a work on the day-to-day. It is something that starts every beginning of year, but that does not finish by the end of the year. This is important that we always reinforce. It's like raising a child. You have to keep on doing the right work. But now youngsters understand the importance about talking about the subject, and they are aware that discriminating diversity is wrong. It was the first step for them to have a critical view about their everyday attitudes. And with that, we were able to have changes in schools. And what's the relationship between all this and BNCC? BNCC talks about discursive or speech skills and competencies. I also teach Portuguese. I think that language is very important for a social function, and so mobilizing people, making people aware, and also revisiting postures and reflexive use of the internet. I would like to close saying that citizenship should be understood as the way we have our role as citizens, now, not only offline, but also online. Thank you. Now we are going to open for questions. We are going to gather a bunch of questions, and then we are going to have our panelists comment. The first is about the difficulties of schools. I think today there is still a culture that has to be broken in terms of technological barriers, because many teachers think, how am I going to work with safe internet if computers at my school do not work or they don't have access to the internet? So how can I take the discussion offline? What kind of actions I can have in the sense? And for the whole thing not be just the responsibility of an IT teacher or a language teacher. And my second question, how can we recover this generation that's already left school and has to have this awareness raised in terms of digital? And how can society support the school for teachers not to be solely responsible to prepare a whole generation with technology? So, who would like to start? I think, as a public teacher, I also am affected by a lack of infrastructure and connectivity. We have to have better public policies. Technology has to become a teaching competency. But we have things already. We have kids that are connected in the classroom with their smartphones. So I think that we have to use what we have and talk to them, establish dialogues with what we have. And new methodologies. Hybrid education today approaches very well this working on and offline, and we can carry out actions of belonging with that. I think we have to open the doors of schools. Schools cannot be closed. We have to establish partnerships to carry out concrete actions. And by means of active methodologies, kids have to be brought to the center of the teaching process. They can no longer be outside. They can no longer be passive. They have to be active players in the center of their learning. Dialogue, I think, is of utmost importance. Technology is not going to replace dialogue. Teachers have to understand robotics, programming. It's a new skill, a new capacity that has to be learned. New trends generate collaboration, empathy, critical thinking. It's all good. But we cannot let dialogue alone. And what kind of dialogue? Dialogue that can lead to actions of belonging. Thank you, Deborah. Before going to the next one, I brought two questions from the web, and I'm going to just cast them at you. The first is, management of public and private schools still is disregarding the internet. How can we boost that? And another question directed to Christine in terms of critical thinking. Do you think programming language should be part of elementary and high school? Well, I'm going to get back to Deborah, but she was talking about offline work. And I think it's very interesting. For you to develop critical thinking, you have to have not technology, but you have to have dynamics. We have a very interesting experience with a different kind of training. The training that we have are for safety professionals. And in general, we have someone that is trained in computation, that has some kind of specialization, and is dealing with something very specific, like incidents in an organization. Everything that you know in terms of critical thinking. And most students come to our course, that is a one-week course. We have 2 one-week courses. And the first thing they are shocked is that we say there is no computer. And they say, how come? And they are a bit surprised. And why? Because all dynamics are made for them to think. And there are some exercises in which we simulate a computer with paper commands, super low tech. And sometimes we say, so what would you do? And they say, I don't know, I don't have a keyboard. Well, you have to think, what would you do?
And this is exactly what we do not need it. The idea of teaching technology and teaching reasoning, especially reasoning in programming, new stuff, that is related to mathematics, but it comes before anything else. That is key to evaluate a text, to read something critically, and to understand and deal with things. And sometimes you do not expect to have that so early, but reasoning is so playful. When kids they discuss with their peers, with their friends, they start learning and understanding things. But a critical thinking relies on paying attention, observing, and have a dialogue.
E na sessão final, a maioria
And most would say, well, we were just great. We are doing so right. We stop, we reflect, we talk, we discuss, we think over, and sharing different perspectives that made a huge difference. So the low tech aspect of it is also important. And when I talk about program developers, I do not mean that when you conclude the school, you will be able to develop an app. Well, that's not quite the case, and you can teach that without any computer language support. As a educator, we do not want that our boy or girl will live thinking about that code or being able to write that code, but rather to develop that logic thinking. And that will not start with the computer, but unplugged rather. That is, you will prepare some activities in an offline mode for that kid. Let me give you a very clear example to illustrate. Whenever I started teaching a computer program to my kids, I say that I am a robot and they have to follow me in the classroom. I mean, they have to tell me which step to take next. With that, you develop that critical scientific thinking, which is part of logics. And technology is a support, is a step. It's a learning step to help us to reach to help our students to reach their required competence. In our secretary, we are developing a plan in a short, middle to long run with innovation and technology policies that requires infrastructure, as it is useless talking about infrastructure with no computer or no internet. So we are considering a policy that will take to school infrastructure, information, content, and a vision about what technology is according to each school. What is the role of technology as part of that school unit? How can I apply and make use of technology? And by that, we mean everything: television, radio, video, computers, tablet. There are several technologies in the school, and how can all of them together enhance to students' learning? So we are putting together a document which will guide management and future steps, and how to guide the newcomers. What is our guidance for educational technology use as part of an education network? What do we have to make available in terms of content to ensure learning, because that will be set for Portuguese as a language. To what purpose? To learn what? What is, or what are students learning from that syllabus? Sometimes the teachers, they believe they have to stop their sequence to work with technology. No, that's not quite. Our effort is to consider a technology associated to the syllabus without leaving that feeling that we are removing content. No, on the contrary, we have to guarantee minimal learning, including new skills, competences, abilities that students already use or will use formally in their work, in their future jobs, or to work jointly to those who are technology developers. Sometimes we do not even know what we are after. I mean, I want a school game, but how to request it, how to say what I need, how to submit that request to a web designer. A web designer may develop something awesome, but which is not useful to that setting from a user perspective. So any product, once is released, it has to include users. But anytime we release a product to schools, we end up forgetting that students, they are skilled, but they need some previous learning or previous content that will be useful to them. So a solid trajectory, starting solid trajectory, is a requirement for that student to build up their own way, including or excluding technology. In our PCNs, we have writing, reading, written reading. I mean, that is a commitment to all areas, okay? And that became a commitment to civil society. How can we implement the technology at schools? What sort of contents? Some disciplines, they have a wonderful content, but not always, not all of them. So it's not technology by the sake of technology, but how can technology be embedded? That's not a very simple task. It takes time, it requires effort and time, so we can offer something which makes sense to the network and learn listening to them. We, we have to hear what they have to say, how effective that technology or that device represents in the learning journey. So we try to take the best of both scenarios and take whatever we can do to our schools, to our teachers and students mainly. It was quite clear to all of us that new skill is learning by learning. And that can be taught since the first childhood to maternity. We have to be open to that. And by tech options, that is part of a journey, and that's exactly how we have to see it, as it happens little by little, and we have to respect each age range, each education or scholar year, and that will be continuous throughout people's lives, formally or informally and formally, especially after elementary education is concluded, and to be able to understand each one of these age ranges, and to understand that high school can have a higher load of technology, which is not the fact when students are still in elementary or middle school. In high school, that is a different journey, which allows a more specific and challenging requirements, especially in high school, where new abilities are addressed to digital world. I hope, well, surveys and all this research starts by next week. I hope I can come back next year with some relevant outcomes. Well, thank you so much to all participants.
Agradeço aos panelistas. Podem voltar aos seus lugares no auditório. Bom, seguindo agora a nossa programação, teremos agora o painel Bem-estar e Saúde Emocional em Tempos de Conexão Constante. Para isso, convidamos ao palco
Next, I'd like to invite the UNICEF Brazil official representative, Joana Amaral Fontoura, the psychologist, the director of Vitalev, Dr. Karen Scavacini.
o cineasta, produtor e idealizador
Movie maker who has planned the project and coordinator of SaferNet Brazil, Mrs. Cunha.
Bom, passo a palavra então para a nossa mediadora, Joana Amaral.
Bom, ficar na parte da tarde já nos dá um benefício de que muitos assuntos foram trazidos hoje, né, ao longo das nossas discussões. Então, a gente vê palavras comuns.
We have here common terminology heard in previous panels.
Bastante unido e costura. Então, acho que o objetivo dessa nossa mesa de agora é falar do bem-estar e da saúde emocional em momentos de conexão.
We have a constant connection, and that represents a challenge to everyone, especially when we are talking about children, adolescents. That represents a even higher challenge, and UNICEF is here participating. It's always a great honor to be invited to participate at this workshop organized by Nick BR and SafeNet. I don't know if you have heard about a special case, which is the picture, the image of an egg. Have you seen that on Instagram?
Recebeu ao longo do mês de
How many likes the egg got during the month of January? At World Egg Record.
E, na verdade, o desafio foi o seguinte: ganhar mais curtidas.
So the idea is to get as many likes as possible. You know what I'm talking about, I suppose. So the idea was to get more likes than the picture of a celebrity with her daughter. And the picture of an egg went on and reached 50,000 likes. This is just an example to illustrate what I mean by internet. And the egg exploded. That was a campaign to draw attention. And in fact, that meant, well, the internet pressure made me explode. If you are dealing with any problems or issues, just talk to me. And then they present a list of organizations which work with emotional health and mental health. And why am I saying this? Why am I starting my talk with this example? The idea is, or the goal is, how to balance ourselves, how to be part of this environment which works with so much pressure, search for happiness, how to reach a balance and get the best that the internet or connections or networks can provide us. And having said that, now I hand over to the representative of Vitaleri, that is a institution which helps to prevent suicidal attempts. First of all, let me thank for this opportunity. What an honor to be here and to be a panelist at this round. Internet safety and how can we relate that to mental health and to mitigate suicide. Vitaleri Institute was founded back in 2013. Our goal is to improve mental health, prevent suicide, and post-intervention. Anything which is done with someone that is grieving for someone who died due to a suicide. We carry out private and joint services. We give some consultancy sessions, anything regarding suicide. Anytime I talk about suicide prevention, I'm also talking about mental health prevention, emotional health prevention. By increasing mental health, I reduce number of suicides. In the globe, we have over 800,000 suicidal attempts, so an attempt every 3 to 4 minutes, as they try more than they actually conclude a suicide. And this is highly present in the age range between 15 to 29 years of age. In Brazil, we have an average of 12,000 suicides yearly. That's the fourth highest cause in this age range. That means that in Brazil we have a suicide every 45 minutes and 10 to 20 attempts in the same period of time. But that's not much spoken, as that is seen as a taboo and people are afraid of talking about that. There is another survey showing that between 2010 to 2012, there was an increase of 40% in the rates in that age range and 33.5% for kids over 17 or 18 years of age. And to each 300 kids who try suicide, one executes it. That was the case before they found out what to do and how to do it. We had adolescents in the ER who had a whole package of contraceptive pills, but today they know exactly what to do, how to do it with painless. And it's also known that 20% of youngsters they behave for self-lesion. With all this information in mind, I searched for that information. In the search tools, you were able to access it. There were several pages showing you or telling you how to commit suicide. However, nowadays, how to kill yourself, painless suicide, or when you try all these words, there is a warning with to give you some support, the CVV toll-free number to help that person. And now I see pages with content talking about the problem, and that can be helpful.
But still, if you have some words, suicide, weapons, it can show you other terms that might be of interest. And if you're curious, you can look at other suggestions. And there are some keywords like hanging, for instance. You can see some videos, images that are extremely serious. So we should perhaps adapt, look into the terms that are most searched, and escape from the obvious, which is the word suicide. There are other ways people can seek for content. And here on YouTube, you have 7 million, 15 million views. It is a challenge of us dealing with a video that has good content and lots of views. Here on Instagram, you have a message of how to help, but still, when you have hashtag, you have the number of hits. So hashtag suicide, more than 8 million quotes, mentions. And that may or may not make people curious. And on the different platforms, we can find it all. People that try to place graphic content, and people that give you 100 reasons not to commit suicide. Here you have Luto do Homem, which is men's mourning, people that lost dear ones. There are posts of people saying that they can't stand it anymore, others that offer help, others who try to sell services, others that share their feelings, which they didn't have before. It's a new room for people to share. Twitter, I put suicide, it ignored, and it just wanted to show me creative presents to your boyfriend. Yeah, funny. Facebook also, when you try to search such of these topics, you cannot see it, but it does complete some things. But you also have help groups like Anonymous Suicides. People say they don't feel well, and people help each other in a community of care. These are some of examples of other platforms, the Dot and Comma Project, CVV, that use these platforms with good content. Now, are all youngsters the same? Can we think of internet security for everyone? No. We have to see how people use the web. Solutions for mental health, building communities of care based on what they are searching. This is a study that shows that youngsters from the community try to be more disorganized or are more disorganized in searching. They are more open to be helped. And youngsters that are in the ER have a more intentional use of platforms, searching for methods to kill themselves. And they avoid help contents. So we have to understand what kind of crisis they are going through and how they're going to use the platform. Obviously, I'm not going to explain you this whole slide, but just to explain what is the continuum of a suicide and how many things can be trigger factors. And the internet can be a protection factor, and it can be a decreaser of a risk factor. Exposure, identification, and limitations are very important. Why? Because the brain completes its formation at 21. Until then, you are more impulsive, you have less reflection, less self-control, less judgment, less critical thinking, and that reflects into the digital world. These are famous suicidals, and depending on how this is informed in the news, it can increase the number of suicides. I'm not going to talk about the 13 reasons. Ju is going to talk about that. But there was a huge movement of people looking for help and talking about something that no one talked about, which is young people trying to kill themselves. And I think it really brought it out. And this is the result of my PhD dissertation, how we can go from awareness to action. This is what I call 6 C's. People have to understand that suicide is a problem for everyone. There are many campaigns we can hold, capacity building, suicide literacy, that is using this knowledge and transforming it into dialogue, and take youngsters to connection so that they understand others care for them. And that within primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Marcel is going to talk about the Eu Estou hashtag. That is, how can we talk openly about suicide, promoting mental health, but Marcel is going to talk about that. Just to close, challenges of this connected world of today. I cannot read my cheat paper. But anyway, neurobiological implications, excessive use of technology, apology to suicide, the feeling of impunity, and that includes bullying and cyberbullying, user safety, limitation suicides, and to understand what to leave and what to remove from platforms. And the good thing is the building of communities of belonging and care, decrease of taboo, education and well-being, producing quality content that youngsters can have access to, and use algorithms to our favor. This is a path that is still being built. A lot has been done, but much has to be done yet. And just to close, this is an example that the WHO talks about in terms of suicide. There are lots of activities, lots of attitudes we can have, and it's not only offline or online. We have to have access to treatment, public policies, a national plan to prevent suicide, promote mental health for children and adolescents, and responsible education, as well as many other things. Thank you very much.
Uau, que desafio ela fez e cumpriu em 10 minutos. E antes de passar para
Very quick, thank you. Before going to Marcel, I would like just to make a comment
fazer gancho que a Karen trouxe, fez panorama.
about what Karen showed. A very interesting overview about risks and potentials of the web with regard to mental health. And I think we have really to create spaces for dialogue, for listening, and which is something that children do not have. And I think the Eu Estou hashtag is a very good way to use the space better. Always thinking about security, safety. Lots of panels talked about security and safety, but the challenge is still on. So, Marcelo, it's up to you now. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. This undoubtedly is a project of life. So, talking about it to you is an honor. So, thank you. The idea of I Am, Eu Estou started with myself and PC Siqueira. He is the first digital influencer in Brazil. He's been on for 11 years, and it stemmed from a need. We wanted to understand what was going on with us and with our friends around of us. And we started to think about what to do, and we decided to create a community of prevention and contagion that is social, for people to come in, talk about that. So we wanted to use Facebook, the web, to be where these children and adolescents are, to talk to them as they talk, using their language. PC knows a lot about that. I'm a movie maker, I know how to produce. So we wanted to put an end to the taboo of talking about mental diseases. I have friends. I have been through an anxiety crisis trying to understand what's going on, and that's how it started. There is a series of contents that we developed based on three main pillars: demystify the idea of suicide, support those who need it, and educate people on how to deal with someone that is going through a crisis. I met with Karen, which is a very, very lovely creature, and we decided to develop these three pillars that we found were the most important to contact people at all points of their crisis, as well as people who surround them, which is also very complicated. Suicide, depression, people thinking it's just a phase, that they're going to be cured. I've been through that. People do not understand what's going on. They don't want to help. They think you're being a drama queen. And it is, you know, if you have a stomach ache, you go to the doctor. If you break a leg, you go to the doctor. Why won't you go to the doctor when you're feeling sad? And so we tried to focus on native mobile content because this is where children are. They have their smartphones, their tablets. So it's no use making a beautiful movie with a drone and everything if they are watching YouTube. So we had to talk to them in their space. And we had the intention of the project, which is the growing rate of suicide among the youngest. And NGOs and public services are not being able to deal with the demand. So we knew that there was a demand and there was a need. And we wanted to know how we can talk about that in a good way. So, because most of the young just count on their closest friends, they don't have support, how could we foster conversation? So it started out as a project, as a campaign, but today we call it platform because, as Karen mentioned in posts, you write down something and people start to talk, to get engaged spontaneously. And so we created a platform inside Facebook and Instagram. So the strategy is that we created the anti-suicide squad, PC, Karen, myself. So I had someone that went through that, myself, and Karen that knows how to talk to these children and adolescents. She could reach them. So this combination of us three, so I'm no one, but I've been through that. I'm looking into the camera and I'm saying, it happened to me. And you can take a look at me. It's PC with 1 million followers saying, I am famous, but I am also a person with depression. I'm sad. And Karen saying, let's do this and that, it's normal. So explaining the technicalities to everyone. So I'm going to show you a bit of the videos, but if you want to know it better, you can just press at I am, eu sou. Fortunately, we have subtitles so you can follow the video. Every 10 seconds, you have a message. It can work with or without the audio. The same videos have longer versions, and it's always like this. You have people who are the deaf, people who don't have the time, but we want to make it pretty. It shows on your feed. The caption is incorporated in the design so that it makes it easier for everyone. And we also invited Fabio Abu, that is the Pombo Ranger designer, a very known screenwriter, and Vela GV, that together with Vera Sadi made these cartoons using Instagram to show what people are feeling in a more playful way. So it's okay to be in the virtual world, have friends and talk to people. And it's also okay to be in a teaching environment at school and needing someone. And if you had no time to watch the video or read the cartoons, we have the support messages. Just one statement with a message calling you for action. Call CVV, talk to a friend, do something. So we explain why the message is what it is and the code action in the description. We also created a guide. And you can see it on Instagram. And when you scroll up, there is a guide showing what you can do. So you have the video, and then when you scroll up, you have links, you have a guide how to help people. And what's nice is that you have emails that you send an email, I want to help or help me, and automatically you receive a guide. We don't know, it's all anonymous. We don't know who contact us. We just have numbers. There are lots of people who don't know what to do, and people are coming to get information. And to generate engagement, we hacked the system and we created GIFs. So in stories, if they want to start a talk or to show that they are there, we have a bunch of GIFs saying, I am space, let's talk. Or I am blank here. And so you can say, I am feeling bad, can we talk? And that was seen by more than 3 million people. So people are using it, which is, the numbers are always impressive. So results are fantastic in terms of numbers. We already have a community of 40,000 people on Instagram, 7,000 on Facebook, more than 5 million views of contact. In Instagram, we have videos with 2 million views. So quite impressive numbers. And this number is GIFI with more than 2 million, now almost 3. So I receive lots of messages from people that are afraid of being in the community. I mean, for them not to feel bad that they are following the community, but still they watch the video every week. So we have a lot more views than followers because it's still a taboo. And our content is being used in the classroom in places that would never cross our mind. People in churches, Karen talks about that in their videos. Adolescents talking to the preachers, priests with their parents, but we receive messages that we are being used as support. This is in the inland of the state of Pará, up north, people using us. And there is another result that is truly priceless, which is the messages we get from people that use our content. Whenever I talk about that, I feel like crying and I have goosebumps. The second day, I received a message from a girl. My personal metric was when I receive a message from someone who was touched and decided to give up and rethink suicide because of me, I will feel myself thorough. And the second day, I received a message of a girl saying, I met you on the last day of my life and you made me rethink. So this is priceless. No movie that I can make in the future will have this load of emotion. And now there are lots of things we want to do with Karen, Dani. We thank you publicly, Dani from Facebook, Steve from Christian Shopping. So it was a work of partners. We work with that as a campaign with media to really promote mental health. And we have now a new series of contents, interviews, testimonials of survivors, both of those who tried to commit suicide and were unsuccessful, and those that are mourning those that committed suicide, for people to understand what happens later. We have an educational guide for educators, for influencers, and face-to-face events. That is what we want to generate dialogue. And this is the most important thing. We have to talk. And very soon we are going to expand to the whole of Latin America. If you want to follow us, hashtag Eu Estou, I Am, also on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you very much.
Marcelo, é realmente emocionante.
Marcelo, amazing stories, and that reflects indeed our teamwork. You have mentioned several partners, but you guys, as the squad, the pro life squad, let's name yourselves like that now. Yeah, this is exactly the idea, to have a different speech. Well, I am fine.
Luz ou enfim, espaço, abraço
When you have maybe a virtual hug, a way of embrace those people. Let me just open a parenthesis here. Well, the name of the project comes exactly from that. That's the name, the idea that we are bad, we are feeling bad. When you are with a flu, you are not a flu, right? You are that moment with the flu. If you are a suicide, you are not a suicide. You have that ideation at that time, especially adolescents, that they are very instantaneous. They are like that, but they are not that. If they breathe, if they open for a dialogue, just, have an ice cream, have a coffee and talk and talk. Yeah, they have to perceive their importance individually, collectively, and adolescence has that challenge of learning, daily learning, and how they need references, okay? Someone who's got a very important role in the media, someone who has an important technical knowledge, or maybe a teacher of reference, how to go through that network with different characteristics, features, and potentialities. Thank you so much for sharing, and let's follow that. Now, Juliana, I want to be a bit provocative, as we have to emphasize the role of adolescents, how that will help our work or the P work to be valued, and maybe to share a little bit your experience with the Safer Net. If you could add a Safer Lab, I mean, she said. That's a cool initiative to share. And the role of teenagers as part of the network, being virtual or physical or local.
Bom, boa tarde a todas e todos. Falar depois.
Good afternoon. Talking after Isidoro is not an easy task because we fall in love with him, right? He's amazing. I'll try not to breathe as I have too much to cover here in this short time. Anyhow, SaferNet exists for over 12 years, and we are responsible for a national center of denuncias. We have some work with education. Being here today, participating at this event is one of the initiatives where we want to include several sectors to make teachers able. And last, we offer services, which is a toll-free line to listen to children, adolescents, youngsters, and their online experience. It's important to understand from their perspective how they see those different moments, stories. 24,000 people accessed that service. That's a very interesting service because it can be accessed from anywhere. Adolescents prefer chat and parents emails yet. And this is an opportunity to understand their perspective. It's still, when we talk about internet safety, we are more related to as how parents and educators see the problems. But how about them? These are the most frequent situations, such as sexuality, and all those news and the consensual about that is the main issue. And second, anything which encompasses discrimination and intimidation among peers, cyberbullying. With that, we have a hint of what bothers the most those people in the web. And there is a case that is very didactic and it illustrates really well this conversation about mental health, especially when that is caused by the internet or when the internet is the one to be blamed as the reason for these malicious results. The Blue Whale case happened around 2 years ago. Following that, there was another version of the Momo's doll following the same type of pattern. That started in April 1st, Fool's Day. That's quite ironic, isn't it? Based on an Open TV broadcast announcing cases of adolescents, over 130 teenagers who committed suicide in Russia. And the year before that, in 2016, a Safer Internet in Bulgaria had checked out that announcement, and it was supposed to be unreal, not proved. And that reached Brazil. And the Blue Whale thing, what was supposed to be a fake news, became a reality. And in the first week of April, there was an increase over 1,000% searches involving this term, suicide, blue whales, and all of that disseminated to a number of other news and misinformation about that episode. Then there is a curve here, April 19, that was a peak. I was in our headquarters and we stopped all day long just replying reporters and journalists who were totally astonished, not knowing how to deal with that problem without collaborating to its dissemination, as that is the main challenge in the web, how to inform people without adding to further dissemination, raising panic among communities. And that was the day when we went out of control. We had to clarify media, press, parents, and schools who were really concerned about that. We published just a note to the press. Actually, it was not a note, but rather a large, long text in the Facebook with a organic development, and that was well received by readers as we were facing an environment of little information. And that was a note disseminating recommendations by WHO mainly. So we spoke to the press how we should approach that and what can be done, who can they look after, what sort of services they can do. We also promoted the SaferNet help line. SaferNet helps line helps those who had suffered any sort of violence in the web, and that was a chance for those that were under a more vulnerable condition that could be assessing that content related to blue whales and how seek for help. In partnership with CVV and Facebook, material helping people to identify signals like that. We know that internet and social media, they are a environment where people may ask for help, they can shout for help, but it's important to identify who are those under risk and what signs should we follow and what to do to help them. and we understood how important it is to offer qualified information from reliable organizations. We participated at over 5 public hearings, and several others emerged as a consequence of a blue whale, I mean. Panic was generated, and regulatory standards had changed. Internet regulatory framework, they become a discussion when things like that impact the public opinion. What happens with the regulatory framework afterwards? And to close, I'd like to make a comment here still about blue whale and the second episodes of 13 Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why is uh, it's a serial TV on TV which was highly criticized in their first season, and we had in the helpline. We were available 24 by 7 in the helpline, and that was available. That link was available in the page of 13 Reasons Why. With that, we had the chance to listen to many adolescents, and there was a great pick of access guiding people and family members how to address that topic. And this is the pic showing what happened once 13 Reasons Why was launched. That was launched in Brazil last May with over 13,000 access. Here we have the whole number of accesses that was kept in the following month, where we have noticed that there were far too many people willing to talk about suicide, depression, and bullying, which was another aspect quite frequent present in that film. And any issues regarding emotional and mental health are topics which will matter to adolescents who would like to talk about their agonies, what they suffer, what they are facing. I cry for this or for that. That was a great opportunity to raise that conversations, and they are mostly willing to have that chance. And some other reports, such as sexual violence, and those girls that also used our service to report and describe nasty experiences like that. Unfortunately, we lack of channels to give opportunity to this public to talk about things like suicide. And a university addressed a survey to understand what is the impact of suicide with family members, with youngsters and friends. And this is just a starting point, and we know that campaigns, they also have the same goal. Of course, that they will need a network, and you were talking about that, Karen. How can we do that in a coordinated manner by several players? And in my opinion, 13 Reasons Why was positive in that sense, as it worked as a mirror for what was hidden and not outspoken. And with that, families, they were somehow obliged to talk about that. 95% of parents, interviewed parents, told us that their kids made some type of question about that topic after they watched the film. And how can we address those issues or touch contents that should and must be addressed accordingly? With that, you can help and you can raise a channel for discussion. This is exactly our helpline for those of you who would like to access it.
Obrigada, Juliana. Agora a gente vai abrir para perguntas.
Now let's open for your questions. So what is the role of adolescents in this, in a statement with their stories or not, and how is that spread or polarized in the web, and how can Safer Lab illustrate it? I will never give up, believe me. Well, I didn't have time to cover all of that, but it's still in that stories debate with the case of blue whale, there was even an attempt for the pink whale. How do we create solutions to online problems? Problems created in the web, and the web has that power. At what extent can we create responses, stories, and initiatives that somehow would be a contra story? And in case of 13 Reasons Why, we also had 13 Reasons Why Not. With that, we had, the character had a list of whys, and then we decided to create the list of why not. At what extent can we invite people to talk about it? So I am in favor, I advocate for talking freely about suicide. Just by talking, we can create stories that are pro-life and not against life. The idea is to promote life, senses, and adding to that, we have an example of some topics that we were not even mentioning that were raised by girls. Maybe a girl saw a comment in somebody else's post, and then they created their own channel of discussion for sexual harassment, sexual violence, or abuse. And it's just a matter of building that up, and people will come freely. And going back to Safer Lab and our experience where young people, they become main characters of of these stories, as they are the meme generation, GIFs generation, that fast speed, telegraphic and visual communication. And why shouldn't we talk about positive things and about safety that may sound a bit boring, but how can we take that into a content that will address that culture of internet, GIF, memes, and so on? How then to produce content, how to bring upon light their stories with their own way of speaking, writing, reading, and understanding. We have to understand that they are the main players and not us anymore. We have to go after solutions. Yesterday, participating at a workshop who are Instagram influencers. What are they consuming, and how can we talk about that system that will involve it in a positive way?
And what languages are possible? Comic strips, cartoons, videos, whatever language makes sense to them so that they can see themselves in this situation. Karen, I have a question. You talked about the importance of data. And I think this is also a challenge to have reliable data for us to think about public policies that can have a dialogue with this information. And we are talking about that nationwide. So, what I would like to ask, and perhaps just to stress, the importance of thinking of public policies for the prevention and to put suicide in the national agenda. You said that in your presentation, but could you talk a bit more about that, if you could share, for us to think of concrete actions? Because one thing that you bring that I think is very nice is call for action. Of course, it's important to um, talk and discuss things, but we need concrete actions because the life of each child, teenager, or adult has a price, and we have to think about it now. Well, with regard to data, we believe that the numbers are 34% higher than the numbers we have. And even the last epidemiological bulletins have a different view on reports because they are very general. We have to be careful. For instance, there is an increase in the case of adolescents, but those that most commit suicide are the elderly, and no one talks about that. So we have to analyze numbers in each region because when we are talking about suicide, there are many reasons for it to happen. Youngsters in the north and northeast have different motivations than those in the south, southeast. So when you analyze data, you can understand how they correlate to behaviors. And then you can make platforms on the internet to show solutions that are compatible to their risk factors. So we would have to have a greater commitment of gathering data, correct data, so that we know how big our problem is. Studies show that depending on the religion of the physician that is making an autopsy, he's going to write down suicide or not. Every suicide case has to be investigated by the police. And the numbers that we have on platforms talk about the death certificate, that sometimes you have crushing of organ X. It's not spelled out as suicide. Sometimes I have groups. Each one of you would write down suicide as a death certificate. Out of 10, just one said yes. So we can have a much greater number. And we can use the information we have today to have specific questions to each region in Brazil. Well, I got a question that I think has a lot to do with what was said. If you want to send more questions, no, we don't have time, sorry. So I'm going to read this one that I received that I think is very important. And it reflects a demand on schools, which I think is something that people are talking a lot about. On January the 30th, that girl in school committed suicide. The teachers were surprised. She was an excellent student and had good relations with teachers and classmates. Is there a suicidal profile? Can you identify it? Well, this is about a half an hour answer. There are signs. There are signs that we can teach educators and classmates, but signs are not clear. Some signs just make sense after death. Sometimes a statement that didn't make sense makes sense afterwards. So they're signs, they are not certainty. And there are many adolescents that can hide their feelings very well. So no one kills themselves if they're happy. This is a fact. If she killed herself, there was something she was not saying, because suicide is a way to communicate the suffering that she couldn't communicate otherwise. You can look at the main signs. I could mention the main signs, but we have to go beyond the signs. You have to think of how you can promote inside the classroom mental health. And some youngsters say to their colleagues they are thinking about committing suicide, and they ask their friends to keep quiet. And what we say is it's best to have a friend that is mad at you than to have a friend that has killed themselves. So signs are just the tip of the iceberg. There are many behaviors and actions that have to be developed in school for the whole of the school to prevent suicide. Not only educators and classmates, but parents as well. We have 2 or 3 videos about that in Eu Estou, to see signs and to start a conversation and listen. active listen is very important. If you're not ready, do not start to talk because you're going to make it worse. So we have now a new series. There is a testimonial of a girl, 12-year-old. She had a bad mark, and she jumped out of a window on the fourth floor. And she's paying the price for that 20 years later. And we talk about that in these videos. Before we finish, I would like to ask a question. Eu estou happens because 10 years ago, a friend of mine said that we have a superpower. We tell stories, and we could use it for good. And I try to do it every year. Last year, I did it out of need. I needed to do this, and I found partners. So whenever I have a talk, I say, you all have superpowers. Listen, talk, conduct a survey, influence someone, and we can help people. So this year is going to be a very hard year for Brazil, fully polarized. Let's use our superpower. And Karen remembered we have a podcast. If you want to feel good, the podcast is called De Boas. Myself and Tavão. So real stories in the Eu Estou community. Like I started college, I adopted a kitten, or I did not cut myself today. For some people, it is victory. So 15 minutes, you're going to feel good because in the micro, it's everything good. In the macro, sometimes not as much. But let's feel good. And let's use our superpower for the good because it's good. Thank you. I am thankful for your talks. I think it reflects an intention, a positive inspiration, and we hope to carry on. Thank you, everyone. And now we are going to go to the next panel. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Our next talk is going to be in English. We have simultaneous interpretation equipment available. We are going to give you 2 minutes. Don't forget to take a document, and then we are going to have our Magna talk.
Agora a palestra.
Well, to close the activities of today, we are going to talk about challenges for an immaterial future with Stefano Quantarelli from Italy, former president for Italia Digital. After the lecture, we are going to have a discussion. Dr. Stefano, please.
Okay. I'm speaking in English. I understand there is translation. Where is the lady of the translation? It's inside there. Thank you very much for your effort. I will try to speak slowly. Okay. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure and it's an honor. And I am introducing my book that has been translated to Portuguese. And I wrote the book because I ended up in the parliament, in the Italian parliament. I'm not a politician. I am an entrepreneur. I started working on the internet back in the late 80s in Italy, and I made the first Italian ISP. And I have been the chairman of the Italian ISPs Association. And then our former Prime Minister, Mario Monti, asked me to run in his newly founded party to lend a hand. And I said, okay, yes. And that brought me to the parliament. When I arrived to the parliament, I started an intergroup, so a group across all parties related to technological innovation. And I discovered that many of my colleagues, almost all of my colleagues, did not have a clue about how technology is really impacting society and the economy. And I tried to write something that was simple, but that ties together all concepts and gives a positive view of the future. So telling what the problems that we are facing, what the problems are, but also not being too dramatic about these problems. I tried to give overall an optimistic view of the future. And I wrote this book having in mind decision makers, people who must take decision. It has sold very well in Italy, and now I'm very happy that it has been, I'm very grateful that it has been translated into Portuguese. It's a very beautiful piece of work. So the first thing about my book is that I don't like the word virtual. You often hear about the internet as a virtual world. And a world means that it's a separate thing than our world. And this is not true. And virtual comes from the Latin virtualis, that has a meaning of potential, that is not real, that is potential. And this is also not true. These things are very real, although they are not material. So I prefer to use the word material and immaterial, and not virtual, because of this reason. And I don't like talking about different worlds, because it's all the same world. It's just two dimensions of the world. There is an immaterial dimension and a material dimension. All of us live in a material dimension, but also in an immaterial dimension. Everything we do has a material dimension and an immaterial dimension. And they both are very true. Like the money, it's not virtual. The money you have in your bank is not virtual. It's very real. It's not material. It's immaterial. So the pace of development has been so fast because of, you're a very educated audience, so I don't have to explain these things to you, but basically by the Moore's Law's effect on the development of computing power, storage power, and communication power, I/O, input-output. And these things have had an exponential trend over the years. This will not last forever. We know that in 2021, the race to the miniaturization of components is going to stop, is going to end. We are reaching the so-called end of the 2D domain. But that time onwards, the competition will not be that much on performances like it's been today. It will be on price, and things are going to become ubiquitous. Okay, these trends in processing power, in storage, and in communications are the drivers of many of the buzzwords, of the keywords that we talk about in these days. AI is nothing else than a large number of computation, trillions of operations per second to do reasoning and to do machine learning. Big data is the storage, and IoT allows us to collect all data on which we base our learning and reasoning. Okay, one key point about exponential trends is that once the exponential trends passes a threshold of attention, it is too late. We could well look outside to the world and not noticing anything, but that does not imply that something is not happening. When we realize that something is happening, poof, the fact has already happened, and you had a precedent, for example. You don't notice, you cannot have a feeling, because things happen so fast because they are exponential. Now, this is a picture of a girl, that a 12-year-old girl, and the interesting thing is that in the time frame that a kid gets born and goes to primary school, in that time frame, that it's a glimpse of an eye in the history, in that short time frame, more than twice the population of North America and Europe combined uses daily the operating system Android. The first Android device I started 13 years ago, the very first. And in just 12 years, more than twice of the population of Europe and North America combined, uses Android on a daily basis. This is extremely fast. And this is something that has democratized the access to the internet. When DEMI started, the internet world was not even born. I remember that in 1994, when I started my SP, I have articles that said that we accounted for about 30,000 users on the internet worldwide in 1994. Okay, now we are all connected. Everybody is connected, and it's going to be far more connected. This is a survey made in Europe about the penetration in the active ages of the internet. We are 98%, 97% of the population uses the internet. In Italy, quite less, but as an average, it's about 90% across Europe. And if you ask to those people how long they stay online, the data is quite similar in all the ranges. It's about 89, 90% of the time. 90% of them say always on or multiple times a day. Fact is that we are always on, even if we don't know it. I once was on a bus in Milan, and there was an elderly person that was looking at the results of the lotto on the phone, and noting on a small booklet with a pen the data of the lotto, of the numbers of the lotto. And I asked him, how long is that you use the internet to learn the results of the lotto? And he said, no, but I don't use the internet. You see, when things disappear is when things are pervasive. You don't think about the water because you open the tap and it's there. You don't think about electricity. You don't think about the internet because it's just part of our normal daily life for many persons. This thing has happened so fast that companies have not had the time to adapt. Once the fact has emerged, it was too late. This is a cover of Forbes in 2007 saying, in November 2007, saying 1 billion customer. Can anyone catch the phone king? Yes. He has been caught. Look, this is a popular picture, you surely know. It's the election of the Pope. The interesting thing is this phone here. That is the only phone in the 2005 election. People uses the internet to hold social relationships, just take pictures, sending to friends, etc. The interesting thing is that this phone can be either a Nokia phone or a Motorola, but none of these companies exist anymore. Okay, and that is the power of the exponential trends. Then, if you look at another chart, this is quite interesting. 90%, and it's consistent, about 90% of the people that uses the internet in Europe uses the internet to do shopping. Fact is that you buy things online even if you don't know that you are doing it, because you can buy things without even noticing that you are doing it. So, social and economic relationship on the internet. The fact that the internet has had such incredible growth is not a consequence of just a matter of randomness. It was a political decision. Back in the late 80s, in the early 90s, the politicians decided that we wanted to have competition on telecommunication services in the so-called information society. At that time we called it information society. And we made asymmetric light regulations because we didn't want to have a model of development based on concrete and steel and things that weighed too much on the earth. We wanted to have a more sustainable competition. And that's why we favor a more sustainable development. And that's why we favor, with favorable rules, the development of online services. Even imposing asymmetric regulation in order to favor the emergence of competition against the telecom providers. I don't know if this happened the same in Brazil, but across the United States, Europe, Japan, we had asymmetrical rules in order to favor newcomers compared to the incumbents. So my point is, the tipping point was the introduction of the smartphones that democratized the access to the internet, and in 12 years, everyone is connected, always connected, holding social and economic relationship, and also thanks to favorable regulation. Now, this slide is the core of the book, really, and it's a list of concepts that is quite basic, but once you think about them all together, you can see how these are the basic ingredients on why the immaterial dimension is producing that impact on the material dimension. If you think of the material way of doing things, producing the first thing costs a lot of money, the first prototype. Reproducing it has a variable cost that is significant. If I have to produce this microphone, making the first one, trying, testing, etc., has a significant cost. And then I have to reproduce it, and that has also an important cost. Not as much as making the first one, but it still have an important cost. Then I have to store it, to archive it, I have to transfer it. Transferring requires money, requires time. The manipulation is done normally by humans. Yes, you have robots, but to a lesser extent. And the humans tend to work during work shifts on working days. Now, if you jump to the other side and you think about immaterial stuff, making it has a significantly lower cost. I am an avid player of Scrabble. You know Scrabble, the game with the letters, okay, with the weights of the letter where you have to make crosswords, okay? Mattel does a material Scrabble. They make it in plastic, in wood. I have several versions of Scrabble in plastic, wood, etc. And I have also one in stones, very beautiful. And this has significant costs. If I have to buy it, Mattel has to order the input, the input material, the plastic, the wood. Then they have to think about the logistics. They have to have people that goes to the shops and ask 4 months or 5 months in advance, how many copies do you want for Christmas? And then they have to order the inputs for the production. Then you need to ship it to the warehouse, and they need to have distributors. Now I play Scrabble, an immaterial version of Scrabble, and I played it on my phone and on my device. And you see, I play one produced by Ethermax, which is a company started by an Argentinian and a Spanish guy. The last time I looked, it was 30 people with more than 100 million in revenues, $1 million. And of course, making the Scrabble cost very little, but then making the second copy, making the third, etc., did not cost anything. They don't have to archive anything, to store anything. Transferring does not cost anything, has a zero marginal cost, and it does not require time. And the store, all thing, and the support is not done by humans. And the replication is not done by humans, it's done by machines. And machines do not sleep and do not go on holidays, for holidays. So it's a completely different thing. In one side, you have Mattel. On the other hand, you have these guys from Ethermax. So if something gets completely replaced, you are going to have a tough time. Now, McLuhan says that we used to move and get around by walking, and now we walk for as a passion, for passion. But then we used to move by horse riding, and now we horse ride because of passion. And for cycling, and now we cycle because of passion. Somebody says that we used to drive to move, and now somebody says that we are going to drive for passion. So I still buy very nicely crafted Scrabble games, or very nice vinyl discs, LPs. But it's just for passion. It's for a different motivation. Okay, so it's a completely different thing. It's not only related to material stuff. It's also to something that it can be completely replaced. I will make you just another example that I always make. I grew up in Colombia. My father was the head of the school, of the Italian school in Bogota. And when we were there, if you wanted to buy an airplane ticket to go to Italy, you had to go to a travel agency. And the travel agency, they had the prices based on the books of Yatta. You remember those books so thick where you have all prices defined in advance, 1 year in advance, with all legs of all pieces of the transport. And the travel agent really knew what best combination were possible from Bogota to Italy, either via Caracas or Puerto Rico or whatever, and the connection, and stopping in Madrid and going to Paris or going directly. So, and then you combine the prices, and the flights were always empty because they were planned one year in advance. So you could very easily sleep in the four middle rows, in the four seats in the middle row. Now, this thing, this part of the commercial relationship has been dematerialized and has moved from this side to this side. And you don't have any longer the Yatta books. Prices are not defined with 1 year in advance, but they are adapted weekly or daily, sometimes even more than daily for some companies. The net result is that flights are always full, that they fly to smaller airports where the internet arrives, and the overall cost of flying has gone down, even if the price of fuel has gone up. So it's just to say, well, how you buy your ticket. You buy your ticket, you had to go to the travel agency, now you buy your ticket directly online. And the travel agency and the branch office of Alitalia in Bogota have closed, and many travel agencies have closed, because this relationship has moved from being based on material to based on immaterial. I could go on with gazillions of examples. Now, material goods are rival and excludable. Rival means that if I have this object and I give it to Ricardo, either I have it or Ricardo has it. If Demi comes along and takes it away from us, neither Ricardo nor I have it any longer. This is obvious, I would say. This means excludable. So rival is either one has one product or the other, and excludable is that somebody can come in and making me impossible to benefit from this good. Now, this is the basis of the private property. Private property, private goods are rival and excludable. Information is not rival and it's not excludable. the level of excludability of the information is very limited. I'm not going to delve deeper into this, but it's a completely different thing. So basically, we don't have, in the immaterial dimension, we don't have yet, we don't have now, private property. We don't have private property. The basis of the law systems, all laws, are based on the fact that goods are rival and excludable. You don't buy a book anymore. If you buy an e-book, you are not buying anything, because the physical properties, the material properties of the physical item are rival and excludable. So I can buy a book and I can lend it to Demi. But if I buy an e-book and I lend it to Demi, I am making a crime. I'm committing a crime, a copyright violation. Okay? So there is no such thing as buying and selling. For example, I don't know if you have these green tractors in, I don't remember the name of the company, here in Brazil for farming, okay? The company argues, but even Chrysler, they argue that these tractors are not a device, are not a thing. They are a sophisticated robot where the value added is in the software. So when you buy it, you buy the atoms, but you don't buy the software. The software is licensed. And within the license, you agree, when you buy this tractor, you agree that you are going only to refer to authorized dealers in order to get spare parts or maintenance, etc., and that you cannot resell it to third parties, but you must resell it only to the company who provided it to you. You must give it back to the company provider. So you, effectively, ownership, the idea of ownership has changed. One very last detail, but this is very much explained in the book, is that the material dimension is disconnected. Your chairs don't talk to each other, while the immaterial dimension is connected. So you exchange information and you obtain information. And given that the information you obtain in real time, and given that storing information has zero marginal costs, this means that anything that can be computed will be computed. Any data that can be connected, and anything that can be connected will be connected. Any data that we can acquire will be acquired. And what are we going to do with it? Well, we are going to use artificial intelligence in order to extract meanings. This has some macro effects, these properties. The first one is that the traditional intermediation structure for traditional business has been replaced by an algorithmic intermediation. I don't like to call it platforms, because platform conveys the idea of neutrality. I rather call them intermediators. So the Alitalia, the branch in Bogota, and the travel, Mattel, the distributor, and the shop is replaced by something that's made centrally. Then, given that transferring does not require time and it does not cost, given that everything is connected, you can have faster feedbacks. You don't have to test a product, do a focus group, come back to the factory, etc. You do testing and prototyping always in real time, and you have many tests going on, so cycles tend to accelerate. Given that you can acquire information because it's connected about the single individual, you can do a mass personalization, mass customization of information and messages. So I can give to Demi or to Ricardo exactly what they like. So the idea of mass media does not exist anymore. I mean, it's replaced by a massively personalized media. In mass media, you have targets by different media. Now the media is the single individual. Then the world gets concentrated. Everything is accessible, always, anywhere. And that opens possibility and competition. Possibilities to provide services and things to anybody, any part of the world, to get the information. If you want to know the minor detail of a certain Indian community in Bangladesh, you can know the thing now. And that's an expansion of our capability. Then, given that the cost of electronics is going down and will go down significantly, the traditional architecture where you have a single center of control will be replaced, is replaced by a distributed, extremely distributed pervasiveness of electronic devices. And this has an implication for surveillance. Now, if you know that there is this book, The Capitalism of Surveillance, this is the basis of the ideas. I have to go faster. I apologize, I will be 3 minutes or 4 minutes late. Since the man descended from the trees 10,000 years ago, the world has changed slowly. And we are used to live in a material dimension that has changed slowly over time. What has happened in the past 12, 13 years is that this material dimension has been enriched of an immaterial dimension that has grown significantly and has become the major user interface for interpersonal social and economic relationships. So we still live in the material dimension, we live also in an immaterial dimension, and this immaterial dimension for us is, and will be for everybody, the major user interface. I'm gonna skip this. Now, we tend to think about computers, about the things you have in your knees, eventually about our mobile phones, but fact is that computers are changing, and the major new trend of interaction is by gestures or via the voice, and that thing will grow because in many situations it's the easiest way of interaction. You have lamps now that you can connect to an application and turn on the lamps, etc. But the fact is that this is an actual slide of a project of a company. The idea is that devices are going to interconnect in mesh networks. There is an initiative like Android made by Google that is called Thread. If you look to Thread Consortium, every company, electronics company, is there. And the idea is that every electronic object is going to be part of a mesh network, extending the network everywhere. And this will have microphones and speakers, etc. And that will be part of our fabric, of our homes, of our offices. We are going to be living in a computer because the computation we are doing does not sit in our computer. It's in the cloud. The data we are using is not in our computer. It's in the cloud. It's somewhere. And the way how we are going to interact with it is via gestures, via keyboard, and via voice and commands. And we are going to use services online. And the key issue in order to, the key competition asset in order to be in this part of the game, to gain access to my data, to gain access to my computation, is the fact that I can be recognized. So identity is the thing at the core of this development. Now, very, very quickly, you know very well the topic of network neutrality. In essence, network neutrality means that if you control the media of communication, the medium of communication, you cannot use that control in order to favor one thing over another, one player over another, to do discrimination. And the air does not discriminate when people talk between each other. But once you get informed, when you want to have social relationship, when you want to buy something, there are a number of other layers, the hardware, the operating system, the application. And while we'll talk about network neutrality correctly, so that those who control the network do not use their control to discriminate, we should also think about the fact that these companies that are at the top, they use their power and they base their business model in order to discriminate the messages that we can convey to each other. So this requires a second thinking. These companies are effectively monopolists or oligopolists, and they become the gatekeepers, those who allows us to access certain things. Apple has brought down an application of Facebook last week, okay? Imagine the power that they have. They can decide on top of the current law, perhaps even in coherence with the law, but even on top of the current law, they become law themselves, deciding what can be reached and what cannot be reached, for good or for bad. I'm not saying that they are misbehaving. Controlling the gateway to the dimension, therefore, is controlling the main user interface to the material dimension. We tend to think about computers as enablers, but in the last years, they have become intermediaries. They intermediate work, they intermediate holidays, they intermediate hotels, they intermediate transport, they intermediate anything. And they grab a chunk of the value. This part is not in the book. The book comes up to this slide. Okay, so the following part, and this is the last minute, is that while the Industrial Revolution brought us a traditional conflict that has developed during the 18th and 19th century between capital and labor, and we know very much about this, I call this the intermediated, because capital and labor, if you run a hotel, the capital owner of the hotel and the people who work in a hotel now are being intermediated by those who control the gateway to the information that tend to be monopolistic, because we didn't have competition, pro-competitive rules at the beginning, because we did want to foster the growth. So we have intermediaries, and there is this new conflict that is emerging, the control of information with the intermediated. What I call the info plutocrats, I have an article on this, versus capitalists and proletarians. Okay, now I'm gonna skip this and just come to the summary. Basic research dictates the development in electronics. We know how it will go for the next year. You cannot stop it. It's in the nature. Then, this fuels exponential trends and reduction in costs for processing, storage, and communication. But the properties are different. And these different properties determine some macro phenomenon. Immaterial intermediaries, algorithmic intermediaries, acceleration of events, targets of one, all the issue of the fake news, etc., concentration of the world, and pervasiveness. This leads to socio-economic effects. And the way how these socio-economic effects are developed depends on the only thing that we can change in this chart, which is our regulatory framework. And so it's important that we go to decision maker and politicians and making them comprehend what are the principles at the basis of the digital transformation of this immaterial revolution, and how they must think in order to adapt our existing frameworks to use this enormous power for good and not for bad. Thank you.
Bom, teremos agora então o nosso debate. Para isso, convidamos.
Now we are going to have our questions. Luiz Fernando Martim Casos, a member of COGEI, Deni Guettico, CEO of NIC-BR, and Professor of Economics of the University of São Paulo, Ricardo Abrimovai, and Itamara Lauscher, a member of CGI.br. Luis Fernando, you have the floor. Well, I think everybody heard with lots of interest and attention the fantastic talk of our guest. Did you read his resume? I think it is very important to have an introduction of who he is, although he already showed that in his presentation. But I'm going to read a brief resume. He was born in '65. Stefano Cottarelli is an entrepreneur and Italian activist with more than 25 years of experience in computation and internet. He is coordinator of the managing committee of the Italia Digitali Agency. He was a representative between 2013 and 2018, taking part of discussion of the Letter of Rights for the Internet and proposed bills on the regulation on technology, militating for a neutral network. He was the founder of i.net, one of the first access providers in Italy, and he has a graduate degree from the University of Milan, where he founded the Milan Network Research of students and professors. He was member of the high-level expert group, Artificial Intelligence, a high-level group of specialists that focus on artificial intelligence. I think our colleagues that are going to take part in the debate all have very good questions to ask. I have some, but I'm going to respect our guests, and I would ask Tamara to start with her question. Do you want to start as the warm-up? No, I prefer not to start. Okay, so let's go. Well, thank you. Thank you, CGI, for the invitation. Thanks, Stefano, for accepting the invitation. I was very impressed today with the tour that we had together with Demi to CGI. I didn't know how big it was. I am a typical example of a guy that gets home, turns on the light, and thinks electricity is natural. So when I saw what CGI is all about, I was very impressed. I'm very happy to be here together with Tanara. We don't have much time because we have 3 people here asking questions. So first I would like to make a comment about the book, and then I would like to raise some questions that I don't know if Stefano is going to have time to answer. But anyway, I had the pleasure and honor of writing the preface for the book together with Zanata. Most of you know him. And I would like to highly recommend the book, and for 2 reasons. First, because it is very good teaching material. It's quite didactic. When you want to teach your 15-year-old sibling or a young friend what this is all about, how it works, I think Stefano's book is an excellent introduction. And I think the book works as Stefano talks, by means of examples. It's completely different from my style. I'm always based on concepts, and I really admire those that can use concrete examples to expose their ideas and not rely on concepts. The book conceptually is very rich, but the examples make it very easy to understand. And second, because we are going through times in academic literature and in the press that focus on the topics that we discuss today. And it is a time of deep dystopia. That is, in 2012, I published a book that was called Beyond the Green Economy. I was talking about that during lunch. And the last chapter was very optimistic. Today, I would say almost a Franciscan optimism, to talk about what internet could mean about sustainable development, not only about its impact, how we can produce material assets and etc., but for human communication. And what happened indeed, and what we can see in literature, is delusion. And I think that Stefano's book is the antidote. I think I wasn't vaccinated against the antidote, although I'm very enthusiastic about the book. So I would like to raise 3 points that seem to be important in contemporary discussion. And all of them refer to something that Stefano mentioned in his presentation, which is control. Control. Who is in control? Well, first, there is a political side to it. We Brazilians, but it also happens in Europe, Hungary, Poland, with the prestige of Matteo Salvini in Italy, in the Philippines, in India, and so on. We are living a phenomenon that is completely dystopic, in which the capacity of personification of messages and the capturing of this capacity in political environments converted the world somehow, and the world of politics for sure, into a completely toxic environment. And that which should be the noblest of human activities, politics, the art of deciding how we are going to live together, has become, on the opposite, something that is completely embedded of gestures and attitudes that are completely irrational. And I certainly believe you, were not trained to deal with irrationality. We were trained to deal with diversity of opinions, and to consider that. We were educated to consider opinions different from ours in terms of arguments, rationality. We are not used to dealing with irrationality, which is a characteristic of the political world today. And there is something even more important than that, which is a centerpiece of Stefano's book, which is the immaterial, as he explained, which is how immaterial interferes in the exercise of political power. This topic was surveyed since the end of the 90s with Lawrence Lessig, with the idea of Coldest Law, and more recently, James Susskind in a beautiful book called Future Politics, that shows how, in a more and more expressive manner, our social capacity to discuss democratically laws and the idea of law as something that we can disrespect. You're going to be punished if you are to disrespect it, but you have the possibility of disrespecting it. As laws are incorporated to digital devices, those that design the laws are no longer in the social and political world, but rather in the digital world. And because this digital world is not decentralized, quite the opposite, it is characterized by deep concentration, then we have a major challenge for contemporary democracy, as it can be seen in the fact that when there is a circulation of autonomous cars, we will no longer have the possibility of going beyond the speed limit and get a fine. The car will not enable you to do that. James Susskind gives countless examples in the sense, and as something that could seem good is extremely dangerous, because it removes us from the decision of abiding by the law and makes us far from the process of designing our own laws. So the question I would like to ask in the digital world as it is evolving today, with the degree of concentration and especially with this degree of capturing our day-to-day, not only by the devices we use, but devices that use us and are part of us. So this immaterial dimension that is so important and more determinant of our lives, you are concentrating how regulation is dealing with that. I would like to know, how do you feel, based on your experience, that civil society is participating in the process to prevent our world to be completely captured by digital devices? And I apologize for extending myself in my comment. Tanara, you can ask your question. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the excellent talk. I'll try to be very brief. Well, you started talking about the Moore's Law and performance doubling every year, year and a half. And that makes me think of predictions, forecasts. Mooreline 95 started to talk about this issue that every 18 months the number could increase by 100%, and that became a law. And today, we are saying that by 2021, it is no longer going to be true. A decade ago, they would say that the Moore Law wouldn't survive till today, and it's still on. I remember a lecture that I attended a bit more than 10 years ago talking about database. My PhD supervisor talked about that, and he would start with the 1960s with data in files, and then database management systems, and then distributed systems, geographic systems. And he ended by saying that the future was unpredictable. And today, we don't have database researchers any longer. We have data mining, big data, data analytics, fancier words, more trendy words, which are database of today, a cloud database and processing data. So what I think, and I think that was very interesting for you to bring, Professor, is that any technological development, however unpredictable it may seem, will approach the immaterial, will approach the ethics of development. So the technological issue today and technological solutions are not so difficult. Today, we have many solutions for many things. The issue is how does it relate to ethics? What does it mean in terms of privacy? What the solutions imply in terms of what we can do in terms of regulation, for instance. So, Professor, if you have the time, I would like to talk about this relation of the development of technology and ethical limitations and the necessary regulations. I'm going to make some comments. And perhaps a different way of thinking some points. First of all, I think Stefano's approach of the immaterial is very consistent, coherent. I think it's very important for words to change semantics, and really the semantics virtual is not very good in this case. the word control, the root in Greek is cyber. So control is a bad word for us in this case. But what I wanted to raise is that there is a good approach about the immaterial, very complete, and then it goes on regulation that I personally find it harder to understand. I'm afraid by putting together these two things that we are using metrics of the old world to the new world. So this dichotomy of material and immaterial is going to influence what regulation is all to be about in the future. There is a book talking about digital life, and it makes a difference between bits and atoms. If you have a frontier in a country, you can prevent some items to go in, for instance. But what do you do with bits? And as everything is turned into bits, you have an inadequacy of old control means based on matter. There is a text saying opening wine without a bottle, and it is that. You are somewhere without borders. And still talking about words, I understand the danger of monopolies. We live among that. But perhaps this is not an issue about monopolies, but rather of power, because in fact, no one is very much concerned in trying to understand or control this trend. Ricardo talked about irrationality. There is another important Italian thinker that passed away recently, Umberto Eco, and he can be very caustic about things. And what he shows somehow, what he says somehow shows this irrationality. And I think that you have this political irrationality, but it is somehow boosted by the speed and the lack of substance that is found in the way people respond to that. So I think this is all very complicated. And perhaps it would be interesting to talk about that because we have to live with that. And still talking about laws and regulations, there is another thing that I think should be addressed, which is the following. You said that the electronic world will eventually need moral that will no longer need moral gears because it's going to be part of the procedure. I think that we are living through times in which ethics is being replaced by law. In the Godwood days, my grandmother said that I had to stand up to give my seat to an elderly person. Today, there is a law saying that. So it's no longer my moral obligation. I can today say, are you really 65? Show me your ID. So you are going to change something that was part of your ethical structure for something that the law tells you to do. If the law tells you to say good morning every day, the good morning will lose this value of spontaneity that is not good. And I think that may lead to complicated things. So this type of limitation is something important to address. Anyway, I thought that the talk was brilliant. And what Tanara mentioned in terms of unpredictability, in Brazil, it is even more complicated. Sorry, we have no time.
I have two questions, Stefan. Considering your experience, all your controversies to be provocative and things addressing control, ethics, and not have a good forecasting previsibility. I was reading Le Monde, and it was said that CDS is discussing about taxation of Google, GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, which are immaterial companies. And we know that such a tribute exists maybe to overcome inequalities or maybe to represent compromise or to motivate some social behaviors. Within that complete reflection that you made, considering all the issues, I would ask to you now that expected rate, taxes, payment about the material activities, what is its final destiny? Which sort of social behavior should that motivate or maybe motivate or demotivate? What sort of situations to try to keep what you called as original order of things?
Yeah, now in all of this reply in 3 minutes. So 20 minutes for the question, 3 minutes for the reply. I cannot reply. I will give some perhaps meta answers. I was in the parliament. I was very lucky to be in the parliament, and I learned how democracy is difficult and how is fragile.
Stefano, you have 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. Okay. I will take my time then. I learned how difficult is democracy and how it is really fragile. And how the purpose of democracy is not efficiency. So this is part of the answer to all the three of you. We as a system, we don't tend to a solution. We tend to a compromise. And so we are not going to have any of these answers. We are going to have just approximations. And all approximations will evolve over time. All this stuff has happened in the last 12 years. And the world has changed. Can you imagine that in the next 50 years, we are not going to find ways to tackle the most pressing of these issues? The world is not going to end because of the immaterial, the dematerialization of the world. And we're going to tackle sector by sector and doing approximations. Your question about the taxes and where should taxes be directed, one thing that I learned in the parliament is that when you say that you put this tax, well, in Italy, I don't know here, once you put this tax on a certain thing and you say, well, the revenues from this tax must go to this, that never happens. Really, it never happens. They just go in the pot where to fund all the general politics of the state. So, but nevertheless, taxing is indeed an issue because we are, you know what is happening. Let's say about, now yesterday, I think, or today, well, I don't know because time really is not that important, but Apple has reached an agreement in France for 500 million euros in taxes they had not paid in the last years. You know that, I don't remember the figure, tens of billions that Apple had parked in a small island of tax that was not, or money that was not brought into the States, because otherwise it would have been taxed at the statutory rate, and they just brought this money back to the States when Mr. Trump said that he was going to give a discount on the money coming back. So there are companies that are building, based on intellectual properties revenues, they are building huge amounts of money that they park somewhere, and they negotiate tax cut in order to bring it back and distribute to shareholders, and bonuses of the managers, of course. This thing, we are going to solve it. Now there are some countries, in Europe, we are 500 million people, and it's obvious to everyone how we should deal with taxes. But there are 3 states in Europe, namely Ireland, Luxembourg, and Malta, that oppose the introduction of digital taxes, of web taxes, call it as you want. Why? Because they have based their competitiveness based on hosting companies that elude taxation. And so, as we have this way of veto power of some states, we are not solving this issue. But that will change. That will change because history goes in that direction. In Europe, we had the prohibition, a structural limitation, because of some member states that did not want to have it, for network neutrality provision. And then some states said, no, we are going to regulate network neutrality, even if the European Commission does not want us to do it. And they started the regulation in the Netherlands. And the way how the rest of Europe reacted is that they said, okay, now the dam is broken, and so let's start and regulate network neutrality. They introduced a network neutrality provision throughout all Europe. Not optimal, it's an approximation, but it's good enough. And the same is happening with taxes. Some countries are breaking the European laws, and they are starting to introduce taxes, and we are going to tax these kind of revenues. Revenues that are based mostly on zero marginal costs. It's different if you tax a car or if you tax an advertisement, because advertisement has zero marginal cost, and the cost of opportunity is 100%. I mean, if you don't sell that advertisement, you don't have revenue. If you sell it, I mean, your costs don't go up. So you can think of taxes on revenues, different levels of taxes, because you don't have the costs associated, because costs are fixed. So we can be inventive in taxation, and we are being invented. I spent too much time talking about taxes. But that is an example of how we are going to start approximating and intervening, etc. Now, about the regulation issue and this fact that somebody starts and then things evolve, think, for example, of the interesting, in my view, I was a friend of Stefano Rodotà. I worked with him a lot. And he started preaching about data protection and privacy many decades ago. And when we ended up in Europe having data protection, and now we have the GDPR. And what is happening is that even if you are not bound to GDPR because you do not operate in Europe, same kind of regulation, similar kind of regulation is pouring worldwide because of imitation. It's not identical, it's not perfect, it's an approximation, but it's starting to spore. And the same thing is going to happen. In India, they just decided that those who run an intermediary cannot be part in the game. So if you are Amazon and you have the exchange, you manage the two-sided market, having sellers and buyers, you cannot be one of the sellers. You can be the platform, the enabler, the intermediary, but you cannot be part of the game. This is an example of how you can possibly regulate some part of this, of the problems arising from this. And eventually that will happen. And that will happen in India, and it will spread elsewhere. Technology is determining the condition of determining new problems, but it's also posing the conditions of having new solutions. I am a fan of a technology called IPFS. IPFS stands for Interplanetary File System. It's a protocol suite, and if you don't know it, you should take a look at it. It's made by it's developed by a company. It's all open source, and it's developed by a company called Protocol Labs, funded by two 23, 24 years old guys that worked with Tim Berners-Lee until last year. And they are building a cryptographic overlay network on the internet so that you can become the one who controls who uses your data and for what, and where your data is stored. So they are bringing in rivalry and excludability into information. If they succeed, if they don't succeed, somebody else will succeed in 5 years. But if they succeed, in any case, it's going to change the way how we think about applications. And they will pose the foundation in order to have interoperability on internet services. And this is a matter of regulation. I will end with this. No, I have to talk about ethics, sorry. I did this example yesterday, and I think that it somehow gets to the point. Imagine that no antitrust law exists today. No antitrust law exists today. Someone comes in, your president comes in and says, you know what? I'm going to introduce a regulation that allows me to take a company and break it apart, to force a company to be broken apart. I'm going to introduce a regulation that allows me to set the prices of that company, to tell how much market share they can have. I mean, we would not consider it a communist now. It's far worse. It's a huge power. But that has happened when a handful of people controlled the economy in the United States, the economy and politics, the robber barons. And Sherman and Brandeis, there is a very beautiful sentence, if you have the chance of reading Columbia Steel versus United States, an antitrust case, the antitrust case known as Columbia Steel versus the United States. Go and look for it. It's very beautiful, the motivations. It's heart-touching, really. And they introduced a regulation that gave this power because they said that economic power tends to become political power, and such a political power must stand in the hands of the people and not in the hands of a handful of people. It doesn't matter how respectful they are. And they did that regulation. And we are going to have similar regulations. We are going to impose interoperability. I wanted, for example, you have a problem about WhatsApp, no? Here, imagine that you don't have a single client, a single application, WhatsApp, but you have many user bases interconnected. Like you do with text messages. You cannot have a complete view of all the users because the users are fragmented. I've shown that one of the implications is that everything tends to concentrate because of the properties. But we can regulate that things must not be concentrated. It has happened in the economy. We can do it in information as well. We can put Chinese walls into, like India is proposing, into information, like we did in finance. You know that now WhatsApp is starting to limit the amount of retransmission of information. It's building frictions in the rightmost column when you say that transferring does not require time. We could introduce frictions there. And so gain time in order for the society to allow the society to adapt. We could, for example, say that nothing can be shared more than 2 levels, and that when I share something, it appears on the other screen after 8 hours. And it's a simple regulation and would dramatically change how things are happening now. I don't have the solution. I'm not arguing that these are the right things to do. What I'm saying is that we are just starting to realize that by intervening with regulation, and we can intervene, we can determine the effects that technology has on society. Of course, ethics needs to be a part of the game. Even more now that we are moving away from an algorithmic perspective and we are going to a statistics perspective. So with AI, this is, I think, one of the things that, if I must say, what my mission now, the things I'm most interested in doing now is trying to explain people that artificial intelligence is not magic and it makes mistakes. Because the general people think that artificial intelligence can solve problems. But it does not solve problems. It creates new problems because it makes mistakes. And you must understand why it makes mistakes. I am giving classes in schools. Education plays a significant part. We are all people that we started to live before using the internet. My daughter thinks in a way that it's different from what I think. They are more acquainted to certain dynamics. They don't even think them if they post nude pictures of themselves online. They exclude it. Okay, but I never really educated them about this, but it's become part of their social community, this kind of behavior. So we need to make part of the knowledge of everybody that artificial intelligence is not perfect. It makes error by design. And so we need to take a lot of care about the people that gets wrongly, people that on top of whom decisions are wrongly taken. If you are part of a wrong decision, you must have extremely fast, extremely efficient ways of redress and correct. And that must be a core part of the design. The way how I tell this is that I tell people when I sign an account with the bank, I don't ask how much interest they are going to give me. I ask what are the conditions when I get out to close my account. So the point here is not thinking about the wonderful thing it can do, but thinking about what happens if it goes wrong, because it will go wrong. And I try to explain them that it's statistics and it's just mathematics and it's nothing, it's not science fiction. So, and once you get this, you immediately come to the fact that, oh, then we need to have an ethical view and decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. If you, and I conclude with this, if you have not had the chance, you can take a look in the European Commission, in the group of experts in AI, we presented the draft version of proposed guidelines for an ethical and trustworthy AI. We started working on trusted AI, because if you cannot trust AI, you're not going to have economic success. That was the start of the discussion. We ended up saying that AI must not be trusted, but it must be trustworthy, and that trustworthiness happens only if you behave ethically. And so we enumerated a number of ethical principles. This, then we are going to propose regulations, etc. But this is how we are starting to adapt. This whole stuff happened started happening 12 years ago. In the next 12 years, we are going to see a lot of change. We are going to make mistakes. Positive regulation and negative regulation will be diffused, and we just need to start working on it, really, and learning by doing. Thank you.
Alô, está ouvindo? Tá? Tá. Eu queria agradecer muito ao professor. Infelizmente, o tempo está adiantado.
Unfortunately, we do not have much time, but I think the lesson that he gives us is incredible, a critical view, but I see hope when you talk about humanism and ethics, and I think this is the challenge, to have a safe, democratic internet that makes sense, but then you have to privilege values. You cannot just let profit and distribution talk. I think this is the message. Now you're going to talk about the launch of the book. We thank you, Professor, very much. Our panelists, attendants, Tiago, and all the team, Nivaldo from CGI, the audience. I hope it has been profitable. It sure was. And now the MC has the floor. Well, I would like to thank the panelists. Because of the time, we are not going to open for your questions, but now we are going to have the autograph session, and the members of the panel are also going to be in the cocktail, and you can ask them questions directly. Before closing, I'll call Rodrigo Nejmin, Education Director for SaferNet. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to thank you all for coming. It was a long day, lots of people following us on the web. Thank the engagement of all our partners, panelists, Stefano, a brilliant closing. And thank you all, because this event was only possible with Nick, CGI, but also Facebook, Google, Instagram, and Telefônica Vivo. And save the date. Next year, it's a difficult time, but probably on the 4th of February, we are going to start next year with personal data protection, intelligent toys, so many challenges. Thank you on behalf of SaferNet Brazil, and I wish you all a fantastic cocktail. Go have a good week, a good month for the internet. We have several events for the Safe Internet event, and you'll be able to follow us on the streaming on our website throughout the year. You'll find lots of material there. So thank you very much. Thank all panelists, and enjoy your cocktails. I already bought the book. I'm going to be on the line for Stefano's signature. And have a good week. Thank you. We'll now have the closing cocktail with the launch of the book by Stefano Quintarelli. And he's going to sign the books in the cocktail that is going to be served behind the stage. Do not forget to hand back your translation equipment, and have a good evening.